So the question arises as to what has happened between 1990 to 2015, the period which I have looked at. While India tripled its share in the world export market and Bangladesh quadrupled it, our share has gone down from 0.18% to 0.14%, and if I look at 2018, it will be even lower because we are on a declining path since last 4 years. So I examined the reasons to provide a guidance or a path forward for revival of our export sector. A lot of people were only concerned with what I call as the short-term cyclical problems. They said, and these are right, I mean, I'm not denying their importance. We had energy shortages, which diverted the orders from Pakistan to Cambodia, to Bangladesh, to Vietnam. We have a very high cost of production, particularly in gas and electricity, where domestic consumers are being subsidized by industry. There's no other country which actually does that. Domestic consumer of a gas today pays only 100 rupees per MMBTU, while the industry and export sector pays 600 in Sindh and Balochistan and 1300 in Punjab. And this is a problem which is increasing the cost of production. So yes, it is what I call as a cyclical problem. And yes, there are bottlenecks in getting the refunds from the FPR. You don't get your rebates, so it creates liquidity problems. So I classify all these in the cyclical problems. But more important, we have major structural problems, because this trend is a 25-year trend. It is not just 5 or 6 year trend. And therefore, we have to examine what is really happening. The composition of our export basket has remained completely unchanged. It is the same textiles, leather, rice, sports goods, which are almost 2/3 of what I call as the resource-based or agro-based labor-intensive. Now the world has changed around us, and most of the sunrise industries where the demand is in engineering, in chemicals, in pharmaceuticals, in semiconductors, and the countries which have invested in these, they have done extremely well. Textiles, entire market is only $750 billion in $20 trillion of the export market. So it is not a very significant item. Within the textile, you will be surprised that we are not catering even to the tariff lines for which we have been given GSP Plus concession. We are only utilizing a very small proportion, which is of the cotton-based textiles. The world around us is moving towards man-made cotton mixed fibers. The largest growth area is in this leisure wear. And leisure wear is all man-made fibers with cotton. And we are unable to meet those tariff lines for which we have been given concessions. 0 tariff in the GSP Plus. So we are still stuck in the same old game. Why are these structural problems? Both the government policies as well as the private sector behavior are responsible for it. We have too much of blame game in this country. The private sector blames the government, and the government blames the private sector. But a dispassionate analysis shows that at the macroeconomic level, we have never followed an export growth-led strategy during the last 25 years, although every government has paid lip service, and the trade policy starts with this very pious statement of intention. The taxation system penalizes the formal, organized, and compliant firms while allowing the informal and unorganized sectors to evade taxes, placing the organized sectors, which includes the exports, at a competitive disadvantage. And therefore, you cannot have economies of scales and the benefits of agglomeration, and therefore growth remains stunted because you are not competitive. Your economies are not of scale or scope. The permits, licenses, inspections, and no objection certificates which are required by the various federal, provincial, and local government departments, and the extra payments which are demanded by the lower functionaries of these departments add to the transaction cost. There are as many as 56 taxes, levies, fees which the exporters have to pay. Of course, for some of them, they get the refund. Now the added complication is that the 4 provinces have started collecting their own GST on services. So the payments have become even more complex. The import substitution mindset is still very predominant to protect the existing companies. Now, in a competitive market, there should be no barriers to entry and no barriers to exit. Only 5% of Pakistan's firms export 75% of goods. And there are very few new firms which are entering this field. And that, to me, is a serious problem. Why is that? We have non-tariff barriers. We have high tariff rates. People don't realize that the high tariff rates actually act as a tax on exports. Very few people make this distinction. Now, Bangladesh imports everything, and therefore 40 to 45% of the final value of export is actually based on imports. And they have very low tariffs in order to bring in the components and the raw materials to which they add value and then they export. But here, we started in 2000 early a tariff rationalization and reduction program. And our idea was that we will bring the maximum tariff rates from 25 to 20 and then to 15. And also, we will have only 3 tax slabs, 5%, 10%, and 15%. But the government which came into power introduced a huge distortion in the entire tariff structure by increasing both the slabs as well as increasing the tariff rates. So we are now in a very complex tariff structure which doesn't help the export sector. Then we have and this is shown in our what I call as the overall tariff trade restrictiveness index, which is published by the World Bank. And by 2010, after this liberalization which we had carried out, Pakistan had become the world's 7th most protected economy. Very few people realize that we are not a liberal economy anymore, we are a protected economy. And a World Bank study has estimated that a 1% rise in tariff complexity leads to a 13% decline in export growth. So you can see the relationship between trade restrictiveness, high tariffs, and the export growth. Why? As I pointed out, high value-added products, for example, on the man-made fiber, require imports. You don't produce enough polyester fibers in this country, so you have to import. But if you are protecting the domestic industry for the sake of only few players, you are penalizing the export industry because they cannot get cheaper raw material in order to add value. Weak dispute resolutions, contract enforcement, prolonged and expensive judicial system, and little protection of intellectual property rights are some or other impediments for business expansion and export diversification in this country. Courts take more than a decade to adjudicate property and land disputes after exhausting an elongated chain of appellate system. Land acquisition systems and procedures are cumbersome and outdated. Now I come to the private sector. A study carried out a few years ago showed that Pakistan's textile sector productivity was only 40% that of China. Thus, there is a huge scope of moving to the efficiency frontier and reap huge benefits both for the firm as well as the country. The size, scale of operations, market structure, formality, and location are some of the considerations that affect productivity and profitability, which in turn lead to expansion, value addition, or diversification. A strong association is observed between productivity and variables which represent the formal nature of firms. I earlier pointed out that we are actually discouraging the formal firms, and productivity is very much correlated with the nature of formal firms. The higher is the proportion of the formal firms, the higher is the productivity in the economy. Organized firms shave a large market share, and they are able to cope much better when you have business shocks. And this is the strength of the formal sectors. And innovation and skill variables, which are also associated with productivity, can only be encouraged and promoted by formal organized sectors, not by informal sectors. So, the aggregate level, our productivity is depressed because too many resources are being allocated and utilized in the informal sector. A large number of family businesses in Pakistan, even in the organized sector, are hesitant to provide full disclosure of their financials and operations and maintain multiple books of accounts. 3 private equity funds have been active for the last 3 years to find good deals in order to invest in Pakistani firms with only $150 million, and they have not succeeded in closing those funds because they cannot find companies which are willing to dilute their ownership of the firm and open up the books, which is the requirement for the private equity fund. On the other hand, India has attracted the biggest private equity firms from all over the world. Carlyle, KKR, TPG, you name them, they're all in India. And the Indian firms are taking advantage that their own money is much limited and they're getting money from the other investors. So their profitability and their productivity is much higher. So this is our issue, that we are again at the micro level, at the private sector level, do not want to employ engineers, accountants, managers, and marketing executives because we have to pay them more. They don't realize that if you pay them more, you will get much higher returns because of the skill, professionals which you employ. But this is a myopic view that they will get some munshi to maintain the accounts, not realizing how much damage that is doing as far as their own company is concerned. So this is the reason at the local level on the private sector side. And finally, I come to the institutional constraints. We have a Ministry of Commerce who has been assigned the topic of strategic trade policy, but it is totally toothless because most of the decisions are not taken by the Ministry of Commerce. They are taken by the Ministry of Finance, they are taken by the FBR, they are taken by the regulators, they are taken by the provinces. So we have an institutional vacuum where there is no coordination either between the various ministries of the government or the various tiers of the government, the federal, the provincial, and the local, and between the government and the private sector. And that, to me, is a huge institutional failure, coordination failure. I sit as an independent director on the government's Monetary Fiscal Coordination Board. Every time the poor commerce minister comes in and he's called to explain why the exports are declining. And I said, this is a wrong question to be asked. It's not a question to be asked of the commerce minister because he has very little role to play. And we have to think of what other countries have done. The Prime Minister of Pakistan should have a quarterly meeting of all the stakeholders, including the ministries and the private sector, and resolve this. During 6 years, I was in the Economic Committee of the Cabinet. The Prime Minister used to have the regular meetings with all the stakeholders quarterly, resolve the problems, whether they arose from the one ministry or the other, and our exports doubled in 5 years' time. So this is between 2002 to 2007, Pakistan was able to double its export with a 14% growth rate. So it's doable. It's not something which cannot be done, but this is a institutional failure. Finally, we have woken up to take advantage of our strategic location by entering into the China Economic Corridor, but the FTA with China has not proved beneficial to Pakistan. So if we want to make the CPEC, we have to make sure that these special economic zones, and I take advantage of the presence of the chairman of BOI, who will be playing the role to make sure that the preference is given to export-oriented industries, especially the joint venture with Chinese. Chinese are becoming non-competitive at the lower end of many products. They can have the marketing, they can have the design, they can have all the financing, but the fabrication, which should be done in Pakistan because it's much cheaper, so it's a win-win situation for them. And finally, I come to my pet topic, which I've been trying to sell for last so many years, that we have another big market next door, which is India. And whatever our disputes are, we should try to normalize trade with India. The trade is now taking place through informal channels, through Dubai, through Singapore, and through smuggling. Your raw materials which you import from India will become cheaper, so your output prices will become competitive. Your consumers will also benefit because of the cheaper goods coming in. India has 300 million middle class, and from Punjab, Haryana, Delhi, it is much easier to bring goods from Lahore rather than from Bombay or Calcutta or Madras. So I think it is in the interest of Pakistan, and we have done many studies which show that Pakistan can quadruple its exports to India, and India is a large market, it's a growing economy. As Canada has derived, and now Mexico is deriving maximum benefits from a larger market of United States, we can also do it. But let's not become hostage to the political disputes, because that has been there for 70 years. It has not done any good to us. We should change our strategy. We should try to normalize our relations. It was about to happen in 2012, and Senator Faratullah Babar is present here. If it was not because of the agriculture lobby and the elections coming in, we would have phased out all the restrictions on Indian trade. It was almost a decision taken at that time. The cabinet had approved. The President Zardari had approved it. But it was just because agriculture lobby said that we are going to lose, which was not the case. And the President said we will do it after the elections. Then Mr. Modi came in and things have not worked. But we have to take that step because it is in our interest. So with these few words, I hope that the new policy will be more realistic and not just an assortment of ideas from here and there, but a clear direction both for the private sector, but also to overcome some of the impediments which I have pointed out in this paper. Thank you very much.